Hey guys, we're going to start chapter 9 of our novel, Prisoner B-3087. This section of the book is entitled Plaszow Concentration Camp, 1942 to 1943. And if you remember, when we last read in chapter 8, his parents were taken. Remember, didn't come home from school one day, and the Nazis were doing a deportation, which is removal, resettlement, they call it. And he thought he saw his parents, but it ended up really being his parents. So in chapter 9, we're going to find out what Plaszow concentration camp means. So chapter 9. The Nazis snatched me up one day when I was at work. I was still working at the tailor shop in Krakow, hoping that would save me from the deportations. But my work there ended up being the reason I was taken. The tailor shop at Plaszow, a nearby labor camp, needed more workers, we were told. So we were taken. I had known this day would come. In the days and weeks after my parents were deported, the rest of my family had gone too. Uncle Moshe disappeared while on a work detail. Uncle Abraham and Aunt Phila were pulled from their home in a deportation. Cousins Sala, David, and their two boys, while in line for bread. Aunt Jazila and little Zitka went in for a voluntary selection in Zotsky Square in hopes that the Nazis meant what they said about resettlement. By the summer of 1942, only I remained, the sole member of my family left in the Krakow ghetto. I thought I'd be ready for it when they took me away, but I wasn't. They loaded us into a truck, and all the horror stories I'd heard suddenly became real to me. Were the Nazis lying to us? Were we going to die? Were we really being taken to the woods to be shot? I panicked, looking for a way out of the truck, out of Plaszow, out of this nightmare that had already swallowed my parents and everyone I loved. But just outside the truck were Nazis with machine guns. They didn't even have to point them at me for the message to be clear. It was either go where this truck was taking me or die here on the streets of Krakow. I had sworn to myself I would survive. So I made the choice that kept me alive, if only for the moment, and took a seat on the truck. The women I worked with begged to be able to tell their families back in the ghetto goodbye, to tell them where we were being taken. But the Nazis didn't listen. They just poked them with their rifles and threatened to shoot them if they didn't get in the truck. The women sobbed the whole way to Plaszow, but I didn't. I was gripped by fear, but I wasn't sad to leave the ghetto. All my family were gone, and I had no more possessions of any value. There was nothing left for me there. The truck did, after all, take us to Plaszow. It was a labor camp just a few kilometers outside of Krakow. The truck stopped just outside the camp's gates, where more Jews were being unloaded from trucks. I didn't know where the others had come from. One of the villages outside the city, somewhere else. Some of them carried suitcases and bags, like others, like us, had nothing. Schnell, schnell, a German soldier barked at me. Quickly, quickly. He struck me in the back with the butt of his rifle, and I stumbled forward into the dirt. I scraped the skin off my palms, trying to catch myself, but that was nothing compared to the screaming pain in my shoulder. I got to my feet and brushed the grit from my bleeding hands as we were herded inside. And guys, I think this verb, herded inside, is interesting. And the reason it's interesting, we'll just look at part of the definition. This is let me see the verb part of it. The noun version is a large group of animals, especially hooved mammals, that live, feed, and migrate together. And they're kept as livestock, like a herd of elephants or large dairy farm animals. Look at the verb version. Move in a particular direction. Nick herded me through the baggage claim into his Jaguar. But I thought it was interesting because I think that this word was chosen for a specific reason. I think it was chosen by the author and by Yannick, who is narrating the story, because it's trying to point out that they were being treated like animals. But I'll go so far as to say they were being treated worse than animals, because I will tell you that as a child growing up, I herded many cattle. My family owned cattle, and those cattle were very important to my family's livelihood. We sold them for money. Sometimes we had them worked up and ate them, so they were a food source for us. Um, so, I mean, a lot of times they got better care than we even did. The vet came or they went to the vet. A lot of times, money was spent on giving them shots to keep the herd healthy when we'd rarely went to the doctor because it was an expense we couldn't afford. So it's interesting that they chose this word to show us that they were in fact being treated like animals. Plossow was a series of long, low buildings separated by dirt roads and surrounded by barbed wire. A few other men and I separated from the women. A guard ordered us to turn over any valuables, and I gave him the few zloty I had in my pockets. After that, we were ordered to take off our clothes. Reluctantly, I removed my dirty, too short shirt and pants and added them to a pile. Another soldier gave me a pair of wooden shoes and a blue-gray striped prisoner uniform made out of a thick canvas material. I put them on and held my arms out to look at myself in my new clothes. Now I'm officially a prisoner, I thought. I almost laughed. In truth, I'd been a prisoner since the Nazis walled off the Krakow ghetto. But now I finally looked the part. After we were all given uniforms, we were marched to the Plossow tailor shop by another prisoner wearing a yellow armband. He was a capo. Oh, they're not going to give us results. Okay. He told us a prisoner who'd been put in charge of the other prisoners by the Nazis. So it's sort of like the Judenrat, but these are the Jewish prison guards. So they wouldn't have to deal with all of us all the time. We were to do what he told us, he said, or we would feel the sting of the wooden club he carried. Now, I will tell you that all the capo were not Jewish. There are other types of prisoners here, not just Jews. Like in the ghetto, it was only Jews. So the Judenrat were the Jewish police, literally. But these capos could be anybody, and you'll see that as we go on in the story. All of us knew enough by now to follow along and do what we were told without speaking. There were thousands of prisoners at Plossow, most wearing a yellow Star of David on their uniforms to show that they were Jews, but there were other prisoners too. I soon learned all of whom were different colored triangles. The red armbands belonged to political prisoners. This is somebody who didn't agree with Hitler's politics, his government, his army. The green meant criminals. Black armbands were worn by gypsies. And though they were very few of those, as they usually were killed straight off. Purple meant Jehovah's Witness. Homosexuals wore pink. And all of them had a little letter on their triangle to tell you where they were from. P meant Poland or Pole. T meant Chechen or Czech from Czechoslovakia. J meant Yugoslavian or Yugoslavian. There was no letter in the Jewish stars, though. No matter where we had come from, we had no country. We were only Jews. As I scanned the prisoners along the way to the tailor shop, I thought I saw a familiar face. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Uncle Moshe. Uncle Moshe, I called out. Uncle Moshe, it's me, Yannick. Moshe looked up, not in excitement, but in horror. His eyes were wide, and he shook his head at me quickly before turning his gaze back to the ground. Who called there? Who is that? Our capo barked, bringing my group to a halt. The prisoners looked back over their shoulders to show it hadn't been them, and I looked back too, as though trying to see who had called out. One of the men behind me gave me an angry glare and then turned as if to see if he could find the source of the yell behind him. The prisoners will remain silent unless spoken to, the capo told us. And he struck a man in the back with his club. As the capo herded us the rest of the way to the tailor shop, my face burned with shame. I was such a fool. Someone had been hurt because I'd called out to Moshe. I resolved then and there not to speak again until I could find Moshe and talk to him privately. We worked all day in the tailor shop, doing what we had done in Plaszow. Only now there were more SS guards, and we were often beaten for no other reason than because we were Jews. I saw one man struck so hard in the head with a club that he fell off his stool and didn't get up again. He was dragged away and never returned. And suddenly I understood why the Plaszow tailor shop needed new workers, and always would. That night we were marched to our barracks, where we were each given a small piece of bread and a bowl of watery soup. I was just finishing my meager meal when Uncle Moshe found me. "Yannick," he said. He glanced around to make sure our barrack capo was gone, and then he pulled me into a hug. I hadn't hugged someone in so long that I almost felt too stunned to embrace him back. Moshe held me away from him to look me over, and then pulled me close again. "I'm sorry I couldn't greet you this morning, but no doubt you've seen what they do to us when someone speaks out of turn." I nodded. "Yannick, we haven't much time," he whispered. "Listen closely. Here at Plaszow, you must do nothing to stand out. From now on, you have no name, no personality, no family, no friends. Do you understand? Nothing to identify you, nothing to care about, not if you want to survive. You must be anonymous." Anonymous means non-identified by name, of an unknown name, or the anonymous author of Beowulf. So nobody who would know your name. They wouldn't recognize you. You would blend in. You must be anonymous to these monsters. Give your name to no one. Keep it secret. And here, Uncle Moshe said, tapping his heart with his fist. "Are my parents here?" I asked him, daring to hope. If Moshe was alive, why not my mother and father? Moshe shook his head. "I'm sorry, boy. No. Unless they were taken to another work camp. They were most likely dead. And Plaszow is where they bring most of us from Krakow, being so close." My legs felt wobbly. I had to sit down on my bunk, or I would have collapsed. I had known my parents might be dead. There were rumors, after all, about where people went when they were taken. But I suppose I never let myself really and truly believe it until now. I didn't try to stop the tears that filled my eyes and coursed down my cheeks. Moshe sat beside me and put a hand on my knee. "But you are alive, boy. There's a blessing in that. You're the only other one of us to survive." I suddenly realized what Moshe was saying. "Aunt Gisela? Little Zitka?" I asked. "His wife and daughter." Moshe's own eyes teared up, and he quickly wiped them with the backs of his hands. "Dead," he said. "They could not work, so the Nazis shot them." I asked about my other uncles and cousins, but Moshe shook his head. "You and I are the only ones left. You must show them you can work, boy, so you can keep living." "I have a job in the tailor shop," I said, sniffling. Good, good. "Any job you can do outside the camp will help you avoid Amon Goth." "Who?" "The commandant of the camp." Outside, someone shouted, "Roll call!" "Roll call," Moshe said, and he stood. "We must all go and line up and be counted. Remember, you are no one. You have no name. You do not speak. You do not look at them. You do not volunteer for anything. You work, but not so hard that they notice you. Gisela, Zitka, your parents, Oscar and Mina, they're dead and gone now, Yannick. And we would grieve for them if we could. But we have only one purpose now: survive. Survive at all costs, Yannick. We cannot let these monsters tear us from the pages of the world." So he's talking about here exactly what Hitler wants to do: annihilate them, which means wipe them off the planet, and also remove all memory that they ever existed. And I told you guys the part that this book doesn't really discuss, but in the ghettos, a lot of times they had the families bring all their documents, wedding certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, birth certificates, pictures, family, like my family Bible that my mom has that has who married who and who died when and who had a baby when. those types of things. Anything that could prove any documentation of their existence. They made a story about bring them to us and we'll keep up with them, we'll file them and keep them for you. But in fact, when the Jews brought them these documents, they just started a big bonfire and burned them. So there were no pictures, there were no papers for these people. So Moshe is saying the only way they could prove that they ever lived on the planet would be just to survive past this Holocaust. I nodded, wiping away my own tears, and followed Moshe to the open field in the camp where roll call was taken. We were lined up in row upon row while the Nazis checked the numbers on our uniforms against the tally on their clipboards. I realized then they would beat us and starve us and shoot us like we didn't matter, but they would always keep track of us. While soldiers worked their ways up and down the lines checking us off, one man in a crisp SS officer's uniform and tall riding boots walked along the prisoners, twitching a riding crop against his leg. Two sturdy-looking German Shepherd dogs followed along behind him. The SS officer stopped in front of the prisoner beside me and suddenly commanded his dogs, "Attack! Attack! Kill the Jew!" The two dogs were calm as pets one moment, and in the next instant, they became rabid killers. They leaped at the man and took him down in their jaws. The man screamed for mercy and then for help as the dogs bit and tore at him right beside me. I wanted to help, to fight back, but Moshe glanced back at me with a warning in his eyes, and I remembered. I was no one. I had no name. They must not notice me. So I stared straight ahead at the ground, just like everyone else, silent and still, as the man beside me was ripped apart. When he stopped moving and stopped crying out, the SS officer shot the man through the head with his pistol. Goth looked into our faces, daring one of us to react, and then walked away, laughing. That was how I was introduced to Commandant Amon Goth. When roll call ended, Moshe went to his barrack, and I went to mine. The man beside me hadn't been the only man to die at roll call. Another was shot, supposedly for not smacking his cap against his leg with enough snap when doffing it for one of the soldiers. So that's what they call taking their hat off to salute or to speak to someone, doffing your cap, and they had to smack it against their leg. I felt as though I had survived a battle. What's the make the score? I heard someone ask. What's that make the score? It was one of the men who had already been in the camp before I arrived. Goth 7, Jews, nil, another man told me. What's that, I asked. How many Jews Goth has killed since you've been here? No, the man said. How many Jews Goth has killed today? So they keep account, and nil means 0. So Goth had killed 7 Jews in one day, and he kind of kept it like a record. He was making a little bit of a joke out of it. Jews 7, or Goth 7, Jews nil. So the Jews weren't killing anybody or winning anything. All right, I want to show you. Here is a map of the concentration camps in Poland, and I'll show you. Here is Krakow, where Yannick was from, the Krakow ghetto, and here's Plaszow concentration camp. So he was taken not very far away, but you'll notice that Auschwitz-Birkenau is closer than Plaszow. But the difference was Auschwitz-Birkenau was a death camp. That's where they took people. That's where the majority of the gas chambers were. The majority of the ovens were, and we'll talk about what that means. But if they wanted you to work, like Yannick was going to be a tailor and do something for the war effort, then they took you to Plaszow. That's not to say you couldn't die there, but that was just, you went to Auschwitz to die. You went to Plaszow and the others to maybe be worked to death. All right, he also talked about in chapter 9, remember I told you it wasn't just Jewish soldiers here or Jewish prisoners here anymore. In the ghettos, it was all Jews. But here at the concentration camp, it could be all different kinds of prisoners. And so it says, this is a quote from the story, another soldier gave me a pair of wooden shoes and a blue and gray striped prisoner's uniform made out of a thick canvas material. And so here's somewhat what the uniform would have looked like in all the pictures. since the pictures are black and white, they look like they're black and white, but they were in fact blue and gray. And I don't know that you can really see it because it's not even translated, but you can find them places. Here are the different little marks that they had on them. So the different ones, and this one has others across the Jews, but the ones Yannick described, the Jews only had yellow. But the red, the green, the blue, the purple, the pink, and the black were what they had on their shoulder. And this shows how they had, like, this is a Polish political prisoner, and this was a Ch.9 political prisoner. So they put where they were from. But remember, he said in the stars they had nothing. So this was political prisoners. That means they were there because they didn't agree with Hitler's ideas. Here was the green was, what was it, you guys? I just lost it. I'll go back. I know the purple were the Jehovah's Witness. The pink were the homosexuals. And the black, oh, the green were the criminals. That's right. And the black were the gypsies. And we'll talk about the gypsies in a minute. This is actually a true, actual photograph of the Plaszow labor camp. And there's the barracks where Yannick and Uncle Moshe slept. The group of pit prisoners here are being led by a capo, a prisoner in charge of the other prisoners. So this dude right here would have been a capo. And there's a female there, which is interesting. But they're being taken somewhere. And here's kind of a lineup. And this is a real picture of Yannick's family. And you can tell this is after the Nuremberg laws. Oscar's, it was his dad. Mina was his mom's name. He had Uncle Abraham. He's the one that owned the bakery. And Aunt Phila was Uncle Abraham's wife. Uncle Moshe was a furrier, I believe. And his wife was it says Grisella here, but in the book it says Gisela. So I think that's a mistake. Zitka was their daughter. And then he had David was his male cousin, Sala, his female cousin, and two unmarried younger male cousins. So it talks about that. He tells how he's going to survive at all costs. This is Amon Goth. Lovely little fella, isn't he? What I thought was interesting about this, and let me make it a little smaller so you can see it all. Amon Goth was in charge of Plaszow. He was hanged in 1946 for his crimes against Jews. Here he is sunbathing. Of course, he's always got his dogs close by. Here's after he's been arrested. He's lost quite a bit of weight here. You can see he's chubbier here. And here's a picture of him in his prisoner uniform. But look at him sitting there with his child on his lap. So we're talking about a man who ordered his dogs to kill somebody. And there he is. It's just, to me, interesting. I remember Yannick asked about the soldier when he and Dad went out in the night to go to Uncle Abraham's to bake bread. He wondered if that soldier that he saw out there in the cold had a family or whatever. But they did, guys. They had wives and children that they loved and treated normally. This was like there were two sides to them. And I told you, I believe that the way they did that is they told themselves the lie that that these other people deserved to be treated this way. I don't know what made them think they had the right to do it, but nevertheless, that's what happened. Here's an aerial map of the Plaszow labor camp. It's now a memorial park. When you go into the Google link that I shared with you, mine was for Auschwitz, but you can type this in, Plaszow labor camp, and it'll take you here and show you all this. Different things that happen on there. The officers club, the headquarters, the barracks of the SS, the funeral parlor ruins, an old cemetery, a roll call area, all that stuff's there. This is a German Shepherd right here. German Shepherd was an attack dog with the SS officer at Plaszow. This is what this is. Above are Amon Goth's pet dogs, trained to kill Jews on command. Now, in the book, they call them German Shepherds. You can see, obviously, these aren't German Shepherds. These look more like pits to me, pit bulls, but I'm not sure. But this is not almond goat. This is just an SS officer. But the German Shepherd is called a German Shepherd because they were bred by the Germans.